All right, welcome to our final class. We are going to cover the final two chapters. These are fairly straightforward chapters. One of them has to do with international finance, and the other has to do with uh, your capital management. Capital management is not that much different than what you would have experienced in your personal life dealing with your own bank account. So that one should be fairly easy. Um, and then the international aspect be a little bit more of a stretch, I would imagine, for most people, but it is fairly basic level stuff. It shouldn't be too difficult. Just a lot of different vocabulary that you just need to pick up, but most of the vocabulary is fairly straightforward if you've seen it before. So let's go ahead and we'll jump into chapter 17. Let me share my screen. All right. Um, so we'll start off with why a company would choose to hold cash. As you know, if you have cash on you, it doesn't really do anything. You can't, um, you're not using cash to make money. It's just cash. It's sitting there. If you use that cash to buy something like a new piece of equipment or more stock or more inventory or more employees, you could actually turn that cash into more profit. So why would a company choose to have cash? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, they might think that there is something going to happen soon, that a sudden opportunity that they could jump on. I don't know if y'all saw, but yesterday oil went down below $0 a barrel, meaning there's so much oil right now on the market that the people who have it cannot get rid of it. So if you happen to have an empty tanker or the ability to rent an empty tanker, you can go and rent a tanker for about $200,000 a day and fill it with oil where somebody is going to pay you $30 or $20 per barrel to take that oil and then just sit on that oil until the price comes back up and sell it for $30 or $40 a barrel to someone else, meaning you make $60 a barrel. But you have to have the cash right now to be able to finance that tanker or to buy up a place to put that oil. If you don't have that cash on hand, if you have to sell things or whatever to get it, you're going to miss the opportunity. So that would be the speculative motive. You want to keep some cash back just so you can maybe jump on that opportunity. A precautionary motive is, what if suddenly you have to shut down all of your stores because an unexpected pandemic hits and you're not making any money? Well, you still have bills. You still have to pay rent on that store. You still have to pay your suppliers for the material in those stores, even if you can't open those stores. Your transaction motive is just to pay your day-to-day bills. That's just the cash you keep on hand because you're paying out, oh, I got to pay the light bill later this week. Let me have the cash in my bank account to pay the light bill. And the final one is the trade-off. You're looking at it and you say, sure, I could do something with this cash, but I don't have enough of it right now, or there's not a cheap enough place for me to stick it to make some money that makes sense. It's going to cost me 5% to buy a bunch of these bonds so that I can hold them because of the transaction cost, but I'm not going to make 5%. So it's actually cheaper for me not to invest than to invest. All right. Now, float, when you write a check and send out a check in accounting, you debit your bank or your cash account. Um, well, you credit your cash account and you debit your liability for that check immediately when you send it out. But that check doesn't come out of your bank account until that person actually cashes it. And so the difference between those two is float. The first kind of float is your disbursement float. You write a check, you put it in the mail, and you send it. They get the check, they put it into their bank. 3 days later, it comes out of your bank. That could be a week, 2 weeks, or even longer between the time that you write the check and the money comes out of your account. That is your disbursement float. Money is leaving your account slower than you're actually accounting for it. Collection float is the exact opposite. That's you're waiting to get the money from your the person you lent it to or customer's account. You can already take credit for that sale, but you don't actually have the cash yet. So that's your collection float. And your net float is just the when you add both of those. Now that's because your float, your disbursement float is on your side. And in that case, then the collection float is on the other person's side. So they're waiting. It's that whole time period between the time that you actually say, okay, we are writing this check, and when the money actually disappears from your account. Managing float, you can change your float time. If you choose to mail a check, that is a lot more float time than if you pay by electronic transfer. That's a lot more lag time than if you do an immediate wire transfer. And that's more lag time than if you just hand over cash. If somebody walks in and hands you $100 cash, that is immediate transactions done. There's no float. Literally, the only opportunity for float in that situation would be they stick the money on the counter. How long does it take you to pick up the money? A wire transfer goes through in about 15-20 minutes. Electronics transfer goes through, it's kind of like a wire transfer, but it's the older version. It goes through at midnight. Credit cards, things of that nature are also kinds of electronics transfers. And then a check transfer could take 3 or more days. And that has the mailing time, the processing delay. If you're sitting there and you get that check, you don't immediately cash it most of the time. You don't immediately like drop everything you do and run to the bank. You might wait until the end of the day to collect all the checks that you received today, take them down to the bank all at one time and cash them all. Or you might wait until the next morning and do that first thing in the morning. And then the availability delay, what in that case is, how long does it take your bank to process your check? Most banks can do it nowadays in 1 day. Some banks will take 2 or 3. How long does it take their bank to process it? Again, most banks take 1 day. Some take 2 or 3. So if you're at a slow bank and they're at a slow bank, it could be 6 business days between the time that you give them the check and you get the funds. Now, the thing is, all this stuff applies to your personal life and business. Kiting is fraud. Let me repeat that. Kiting checks is fraud. And if you are caught, you can go to jail for years. Don't do it. Kiting is when you know, I get paid tomorrow. I'll get paid $1,000. My rent is due today. My rent is $800. So I'll write a check for $800 today, knowing full well that the money is not there, but knowing that due to float, the funds will be in my account by the time this check goes through. The problem with this is, what if there's a delay in my getting paid? What if, especially if you're a business, you know, I have a check coming in from one of my customers tomorrow. I'll write this check today for this vendor. Everything will be fine. And then your customer doesn't send the check. What if there's a problem with their check? It bounces, or um, you can't get to the bank tomorrow to cash it. You're involved in a car accident and you physically just cannot get to the bank that day, and you have to get to the bank the next day and you deposit the check. You could end up with a situation where you were sure you were going to have the money, but you don't. And so you start bouncing checks, and that's why it's fraud. Plus, there's also, as banking goes more digital, well, a process that I think this recent pandemic will only accelerate, electronic checks are being transferred a lot or a lot more often than physical checks. It used to be, if you deposited a check in your bank, the bank would actually take a photocopy of that check and mail it, or oftentimes in bigger cities, they would have a central clearinghouse where they would literally go into and trade the checks. Hey, I got a check from your customer, you got a check from mine. And they would go through and they would figure out all that, trade everybody checks who needs checks. And they would do that every day. That was a long, manual, physical process. Nowadays, there's electronics clearinghouses, and it goes through immediately. And they're trying to work it so that eventually we'll be down to a 1-day float rather than 3. And if we get down to a 1-day float, whoever is kiting checks at that point, they might not be told, hey, we're going to a 1-day float. It might just happen. And in which case, they're out of luck and will be bouncing checks all over town. All right, so in this case, you have $3,000 in your checking account. You deposit $2,000, and you wrote a check for $250. Your disbursement float is the fact that you wrote the check; it hasn't come out. Your collection float is the fact that you've deposited the your book balance here. Once you deposit that $2,000 on the book, that number goes up to $5,000. Once you write this check, that number drops to $2,500. Your available balance at the bank, however, only sees these 2 items. It doesn't know you wrote a check. So your available balance would be $5,000, but your book balance would be $2,500. Anybody have any questions about this stuff?
No.
All right. Had a little bit of personal experience with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cash collection. You have over the counter, literally over the counter. Somebody hands you cash over the counter. A pre-authorization is a subscription service. You say, yes, you can charge me $7.99 Netflix every month on the 3rd. Mail checks, you're sending out checks every month, or you're receiving checks from your customers. A lot of these are getting a little out of date. They're still relevant, especially for small businesses, but your larger businesses, a lot of this is going away. So like lockbox processing. If you've ever seen something where like a store has a thing that says has a time activated safe, that means that the cash that they deposit into the safe, until the guy who collects the cash actually shows up, it won't open. It can't be open. No matter, even if you have the right code, it won't open. And then once it hits, okay, yes, this time, the correct time is hit. You enter in the code, it opens up. Oftentimes, they're not sitting there pulling out cash. They actually have a box inside they pull out, and they put in an empty box, and they move on. Cash disbursement float is favorable to you because it just takes longer. Your cash sits there. So if you're earning interest on your checking account, your interest is earned based off of average daily balances. So if it takes it longer for that money to get out of your account, then you earn interest on that money for a few days longer. Um, you know, this is you could slow down if you know that in Roanoke there is a major distribution center for mail. If you mail something from Covington, it goes to the Roanoke distribution center and then onto its destination. If your destination for that is also Covington, uh, depending on how they operate here in Covington, some of the smaller post offices don't do this, the larger ones do. It might not actually leave Covington. It might go in, get flagged as, hey, this is for Covington, and spit out to a separate place to be mailed internally that next day. Or it might be sent by truck overnight to the mail distribution center in Roanoke, where it gets sorted, put on another truck in the morning, sent up to Covington, and then delivered the next day or maybe a day after that. However, if you go up into Bath County and mail something, it goes to a different distribution center. I believe it goes to Stanton. I'm not 100% sure on its exact location, but I think the next one is Stanton. Meaning it goes through their system overnight to Stanton. The next day it gets put down to Roanoke. The next day then goes up to Covington and then mailed. So one way to slow down your disbursement is to mail it from a different branch like that. If we were at the edge of one of the major distribution centers, because there's only like 5 or 6 major distribution centers in the country for the post office, and then there are the regional ones like Roanoke, you could actually transfer to a different one and add an extra day as it transfers from one major distribution center. That's great as far as it goes. However, it only works if you get credit for your payment from the postmark day. A lot of places say they have to be received by the creditor before a certain day rather than postmarked before a certain day. So that destroys this whole idea. And it's not trying to cheat the system like that. Many people would have ethical issues with. Now, controlling disbursements, you might have an account where you keep no money in except for the money needed to clear those checks. That's great if your savings account pays a high interest and your checking account doesn't, or in the case of you have somebody and they're trying to charge extra and there's a billing issue or something like that. So you keep the amount of money in that account so low that they can't charge you. In this case, with a zero balance account, what you have here is you're not trading. Another thing is you're not giving any information about your bank account to the person you're paying or to anybody who happens to intercept the mail in between payments. When you write a check, that check has your account number and your routing number, meaning everything they need to know to find your account. If you have a sub account that is zeroed out every day, and when you write a check, oftentimes it'll be basically like overdraft protection, where when they receives a check that's been authorized, the bank will automatically transfer the money from your main account to that account and then pay the check. But they can't attempt to fish for your authentication and your other things. So they write a bunch of checks from that account just because they have the account number. The main account would be then protected because even if they have the access to get into your bank account, the main account would have a separate login and all that kind of stuff would be separate. So the amount of damage somebody could do by compromising your account is a lot smaller. Mainly, again, only useful for this function if it's a major company. If you're doing millions of dollars through this account, having separate accounts like this makes a lot of sense. Investing your idle cash, Money sitting in your bank account earns almost no interest. Oftentimes, it earns less than inflation interest. So, one of the things you can do is you can go in and buy different kinds of stock or bonds or mutual funds, especially things, um, especially short-term loans that expire within a year. So you have something like, we have all the money we need for next month's bills right now. Let's take all that money and put into a bond that matures next month. That way, we earn a little bit of interest between this month and next month, and we still have all the cash. Um, this might also be a thing where, you own a kayak rental business. At the beginning of each year, you have to buy new kayaks, buy new life vests, all that kind of stuff. But you don't make any money over the winter. But come the late summer, you're making tons of money. So what you do is, in the summer, you take some of your profit that you made, you figure out how much equipment you're going to need to buy the next year, you invest that money in a mutual fund or a bond or something of that nature that expires or matures right before your season starts, and you make interest all winter long and still have the money sitting there when it's time to buy. Another way of doing this is, say you want to buy a car next year. You're getting ready to graduate, and next summer you want to buy a car because you're going to start working or something like that. Or you're a business and you're going to do an expansion next year, or something. There's a big expense coming up. You set aside the money to pay for that expense now and invest it in these safe um, financial instruments in order to make the extra money, or make some extra money off of that. I think we went over this before, where you have, down at the bottom, your only financing long term for your bare minimum what you need, and you're using short term financing to cover the day to day or month to month changes. The other way of doing it is to finance everything and then sell, or use the money that's surplus in these times to buy marketable securities. And I think I mentioned to you that nobody does either one of them exactly. They somewhere in the middle. So this firm is right here, where most seasonal changes, they have to borrow a little bit, but they do have, in the worst seasons, they already have uh, or the best seasons, actually, because this is expenses. Uh, During the best seasons for expenses here, they have enough money sitting there that it's extra, but they still have to borrow each year. So this would be the marketable security. So at this point on this day, they would take all this extra money they are going to have, they put it into a bond that expires or matures right here. And then that little bit would actually shift this line up just a tiny bit because they made a little extra money, so they don't need as many bank loans. And then they come through, and here they do the same thing over and over again. These are just the characteristics of short-term securities. They are different, um, in some aspects from regular securities we've talked about. Mostly the taxability, because they're so short-term. Oftentimes, they actually have different tax implications, such as if it's a personal, or the government likes to encourage long-term investment. So oftentimes, long-term, i.e., more than a year, investments are taxed at a lower rate. So the taxability might impact that decision. Your marketability, that's a big risk. Like right now, it can be really hard to sell certain bonds right now, because the market is kind of in a little bit of a free fall, and people don't know what to do. And there's, people are scared, and they're not going to invest as much as when they're scared. So you might not be able to actually convert these securities back to cash. Um, the credit, if it comes to credit management, this is your giving credit, you are loaning money to your customers. If you grant credit, it increases sales, period. If you say you don't have to pay for this today, people will buy more. But people might not pay you back. I think we all seen somebody who borrows money and then doesn't pay it back. You also then have to figure out how are you going to handle financing the rest of your operations if you don't have the cash today. If you're saying, okay, I'll take cash next month, you might have to go a month without cash. How are you going to finance that? And so with this, you have to figure out what is the trade-off you're willing to make. What percentage of your customers not paying you back? What amount of money spent financing is worth all the extra sales you get? Your terms of sale, usually 30 to 120, 15 days are also very common. And that's just, you receive the product today on, May 1st. When do you have to pay it? If it's a 15-day terms of sale, then by the 15th of May or 16th of May, depending on your exact terms, that person would have to pay you. And if not, they're late. Or you could say 120. If you go out there and you have a customer or you're competing with a competitor and they say, we only accept cash, and you're offering a substantially similar product and you say, I'll give you 120 days to buy, a lot of companies will come and buy from you rather than your competitor just because of those days. Or you can turn around and offer a cash discount. Now that's a way of financing your credit. You say, you pay me early and I'll give you 2% off, with the idea that extra 2%, you're planning to sell the item for the cash discount price, and that extra 2% there at the top, that 2% is the cost of the credit. So you get best of both worlds. Another problem is you have to spend some time figuring out who's a good credit risk and who's not. And that takes some time. You actually have to devote resources. That increases the cost. And then how much effort are you going to have to spend collecting this money? I think we've all heard about or experienced firsthand debt collection. You become a debt collector if you offer credit terms, because if they don't pay, you then have to go out and find them and try to make them pay. So these are generally speaking, what type of credit terms, or what pressure, if this is the item, this is the factor, what would that do to the terms offered? So if it's a perishable good with low collateral value, I'm selling apples. After 6 months, those apples are worthless. After 3 months, they're worthless. So I'm not going to give you more than 3 months to pay me back because I can't capture anything back. If I'm selling a car, I can always come back and get that car from you, or a substantially similar car. You don't pay? Okay, I'm just repossessing that car. So that would give me opportunity to increase the credit period. Low consumer demand. You're trying to drum up sales. Nobody will really want your product, but you're trying to just drum up sales. So you're saying, okay, fine, as an incentive to buy my product, I'll give you this. Low cost, low profitability, high standardization. Commodities. A commodity, people are buying, the price is pretty much set by the market, and they're just buying whatever they need. I need 20, I don't care who I buy from, I'm just buying them. A high credit risk or small account size, both of these, you don't know them, or you know that they're not likely to pay. You're going to say, no. Give me back this. I don't want to give you credit. You're going to pay cash. In competition, that one is, well, my competitor's offering 30, I'll offer 45. Does anybody have any questions about all this?
No.
All right. So your terms of sale, your basic form is, like 10 or 2, 10, net 40. That's a 2% discount if paid within 10 days. no discount if paid between 11 and 45 days, and you have to pay by 45 days. So these are just some credit instruments. Your go through, you can read these. A lot of these are either out of date or they're getting close to being out of date. But your optimal credit policy, you want to carry the carrying costs. It's a required return on your receivables, your loss from bad debts, and your costs of managing credit and collections. That's how much having a credit policy costs you. If you got rid of your credit policy, all of these costs go away. So you have to compare, is it worth having these costs to have the credit policy? If you have restrictive credit policy, cash due at signing. You come out, you buy the product, you have to pay me cash. You have no low or no carrying costs. However, the loss in credit is an opportunity cost. Those are sales you could have had that you gave up because you didn't have a credit policy or you had a restrictive credit policy. On the other hand, if you have more credit policy, then, or in this case, you'd be more likely to have a more liberal credit policy if you have excess capacity. If you have a factory that can produce 10,000 widgets and you're only selling 5,000, you might offer longer credit terms just to make full use of your factory, especially if you have high fixed costs. Those robots that build this widget cost the same if they run or if they don't, almost. A few pennies of electricity one way or another, that's it. Or if you're selling to one customer and that customer is like, they just always are buying a set amount, you might give them really good credit terms just to make them happy. And for no other reason than you can't afford to, and that makes it less likely a competitor comes in. So this is if you remember from economics, some of these charts, you have your opportunity costs, the things you could have done with the money you spent on your credit, or the things that all the extra sales. Here are your carrying costs as it comes up, and this is your total costs. You want to pick the point where your total costs are the absolute lowest, because obviously that means you have the most profitability. This is one of those cases where an economist can draw these pretty graphs. You're never going to experience them in real life because you never actually know what your opportunity cost is, or your carrying cost. When you loan somebody the money or you give them credit, you don't think that that person is going to not pay you. You think everybody you're giving credit to is going to. And even if you take into account 10% of people won't pay, 5% of people won't pay, it'll never be exactly 5%. It might be 3% or 7% or 4%. You'll be about around there. But that means if it's 4%, you could have extended more credit and gotten more sales. So your opportunity costs are higher. And so your optimal amount over here would actually be over here. But you don't know that going in. And so this is something to keep in mind, that you're trying to have this. And when you look back at past data, you should try to figure out where this optimal amount of credit is. But you will never know it going forward. And so you're just trying to make your best guess. Your credit analysis is you're deciding who is worthy of credit. And, that's something like viewing credit scores and all that. I think everybody is familiar with this kind of thing. The 5 C's of credit. A lot of this is going out the window now that we have computers that can do calculations and run millions of scenarios and all that and figure out exactly how likely somebody is to pay. But character, is the person shady? Are they do they often try to renege on responsibilities? do they have the capacity to make this payment? Are they working at McDonald's borrowing $1 million? Or are they a millionaire borrowing $10? Your capital is how much cash do they have on hand? Collateral. Do they have a house? Does the company have a factory? Do they have cars? Do they have inventory? And then what is the economic conditions? Are we in the middle of a pandemic, or is this boom time? Your collection policies, you need to figure out what exactly process you're going to do. Are you going to send a delinquency letter? Hey, I know you didn't mean to, but you forgot to pay us. And then you call them, and then you go to a collection agency, legal action. Or do you skip all this, and after a certain period of time, you just send it to a collection agency? Like, how are you going to do that? Your inventory management. Inventory is basically cash that you can't do anything with until you sell it. It is, it's a cost there, but they're liquid because you're hopefully selling your inventory at a pretty good clip until you're having inventory turnover. And so in some ways you can look at it almost like a cash account, but on the other hand, you can't, because it's not marketable. You can't just dump all of it all at once. And your inventory costs, there's a cost to carrying too much inventory and cost to not carrying enough. Recently, we've been in a process of paring down inventory as much as possible, just-in-time manufacturing, where I need a screw to build something tomorrow. Then that screw should arrive 5 minutes before I actually need to use it. Keep inventory as low as possible. That's great when everything works, but then you have a crisis like where your suppliers' factories get shut down because of a pandemic, and suddenly you're shutting down your factories because you don't have the supplies you need. So that's a trade-off. What you're trying to do with effective inventory management is to find the optimal trade-off between those two. You have a couple types of inventory. You should have already gone over some of this either in other classes or but you have your raw materials. That's just the stuff you bought. Your work in process, that's the least valuable of inventory in the terms of liquidating. Nobody wants to buy a half-built computer or a half-built car. Finished goods, those are most valuable. All the labor, it's ready to go to market. But the thing to keep in mind is, just because it is your firm's raw material. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I got to pop up, but all right. Just because it's your raw material doesn't mean it's everybody's raw materials. You bought it from somebody, and that's their finished product. If I'm building a car, sheet metal is one of my raw materials. But if I have a foundry, sheet metal is my finished product. Your inventory costs, most of these are self-explanatory. Your shortage cost of lost sales because you don't have the product. Another one of those charts, inventory management. Economic order quantity. This is the idea that it costs you a certain amount of money to order something. And so you want to minimize the amount of orderings you have to make. Like if I order pizza, it costs $3 to have them come to my house to deliver a pizza. So if I order 10 pizzas, it still costs $3. So it's more economical for me to order more pizza. But we're not going to eat 10 pizzas all at once. So I need to manage how many pizzas are we going to eat before it goes bad versus how much does it cost to have them deliver. That is literally all this is. And so we can go through. And what this is, it goes back here, your total carrying cost plus total restocking costs. You go through and it's all of these things here, all this, you can read through them. It's pretty self-explanatory what you need to do or to calculate all these out. I'm not going to ask you to calculate these out because I think that's a little absurd with this much algebra for this class, but you just know that there's the EOQ model exists. So if you're ever in the situation where you need to use it, you can use it. But again, a lot of it's common sense. If you apply this to your own personal life, you'll think, oh yeah, you do it already. But for some reason, when people get into a business setting, a lot of times what they would do personally goes out the window, and they don't think about things like, oh yeah, pizza goes bad. They just order as much pizza as possible, or they order one pizza at a time. Um, derived demand inventories. Um, these are where instead of um, going and saying, okay, we're going to need this much in the future. What this is you're using computer programming in the MRP, whereas the computer looks at all of the jobs you're saying you're going to have in the future, and it goes ahead and starts ordering items to come in right when you need them for those jobs. So it doesn't require as much human input, and it's a lot more accurate if it is set up correctly. We already mentioned just-in-time inventory. In this case, you might order a part every single day. Um, it includes some costs for those order costs, but you have almost no inventory costs. Any questions about all the information here?
No.
Nope. Okay. Moving on. International financing. Okay. Still good on time. Some international finance terminology. Fun fact, if you happen to go to a cocktail party after all of this is over, pulling out international finance terminology, not great small talk. I'm assuming everybody is laughing, but your mics are just muted. So I'm just going to go with that.
Yes.
All right. So your American deposit receipt, it's a security issued in the U.S. It represents foreign stock. It can be traded in the U.S. It allows you to trade foreign currency, foreign bonds, foreign stocks in the U.S. under U.S. law, and so it's safer. Your cross rate is the explicit exchange rate between two currencies. Would you don't you have the pound, and then you have the yen. You might not have enough people wanting to get directly from the pound to the yen to have a good exchange rate between those two. So instead, you use a third, usually US dollars, where you say, okay, I can trade £1 for $1 and $1 for 100 yen. Therefore, the exchange rate would be, £1 for 100 US yen. A euro bond is a bond issued by multiple countries but denominated in one currency. You might be able to guess from the name of it. It's based off of the European Union, where they have multiple countries and one currency. By issuing these, you allow the countries that are weaker economically to borrow at less money, versus because you're buying a bond and it's not just Greece, but it's Greece and Italy and Spain and Germany and France. Euro currency, it's or euro dollars. It means that you're depositing the money outside of the U.S. Like with U.S. dollars, you're depositing U.S. dollars into a German bank. That's all it really is. That means foreign bonds or just bonds that are sold outside of the U.S. That's all. It means a lot of times Venezuela sells its government bonds, or used to, in New York, because New York, the U.S. has a more stable economy, and so a more stable court system, and so countries would buy those bonds more readily than if Venezuela issued their own bonds in Venezuela. LIBOR is something you need to learn about, especially if you get a home loan, because a lot of times if you have a variable rate home loan, it'll either be based off the Fed rate, the Treasury rate, or the LIBOR rate. And all it is they ask a bunch of banks in London, how much would you pay, or how much would you charge to loan money for one night to another bank in this group? And they average them all up, and they release that rate and say that's the LIBOR rate. A swap is just all a swap is you're just trading things. You have one thing, I have another. We swap obligations, and then we keep going. So the reason we might do that is I might want to diversify. Say we both decide to owner finance a house. I'm owner financing my house, you're owner financing your house. But we know if either one of the people we sell these homes to defaults, we'd both be in trouble because we're not getting paid. So instead, we take and we swap half of our of the money we're collecting. So say both houses are worth 100,000. I now have the right to half of what you get paid from the person you sold your house to, and you have the right to get half of what I get paid from the person I sold my house to. Therefore, we now are diversified in risk. Instead of having all our eggs in one basket, all our eggs are in two baskets. But when you talk about swaps in the financial sector, you can have all your eggs in a billion baskets. It also makes it hard to understand what exactly you own, because your swap might have been a swap of a swap of a swap. And so it helps interconnectedness, which decreases competition and helps stabilize an entire industry. But if any of those dominoes fall, everybody gets affected. And if there's anybody in that group who is really they're on the knife's edge. If they miss one payment, they lose everything. And then somebody else falls, that can then start a domino reaction that causes company after company after company to fail. That's what happened in the 2008 financial crisis. All of these big banks had swapped so many obligations with each other that they were so interconnected, up to like 70% of their obligations were swaps, that when one of them started to fall, they began dragging down all of the weaker rungs, or weakest links in the chain, which then drug down everybody else. So it used to be like 100 years ago, in order to trade cash, you actually had to deliver cash from one place to another. Nowadays, it's all electronic. That's one of the reasons why you might deposit US dollars in a German bank account, is because then you can transfer those dollars to euros and back and forth immediately without having any delay. The US is the king of these kinds of markets, but other countries are trying to get in on this. Especially Frankfurt and Germany is a big one now. China would like to see theirs. A couple of their exchanges would be adopted like this, but what they have is a willingness to innovate. The U.S. doesn't. The U.S. is still very safe and slow and conservative, and some of these others are like, oh, we'll go to online, we'll go to internet, we'll go to electronic transfers, so everything happens faster. The U.S. is still doing much slower processing than what these other countries are doing. Foreign exchange trading, you can get um, you can get a you can start trading or exchanging over in foreign markets in 24/7 now. It's a worldwide network. It's just the way things are done now. It was a big deal 20 years ago. It became an everyday deal about 10 years ago, and by now it's just an accepted part of life. Your exchange rates. Um, One of the reasons why exchange rates are so important is exchange rate risk. If I agree to buy a product from you at €1,000, and €1,000 equals $1,000 today, that means I have to take $1,000, exchange into euros, and buy your item. If the euro doubles in value compared to the US dollar, I now have to take 2,000 US dollars and exchange it for €1,000 to buy your product. That's a very bad thing for me, especially if I'm legally obligated to buy it from you. On the other hand, if the euro drops in half value to the US dollar, that's a very good thing for me. I can take $500 and buy that item. So just some various different types of quotations. Either how much money can you buy, how many euros can $1 buy, or how many dollars can €1 buy. Cross rates, again, just anything that does not currencies that do not involve the US. So if that you're looking at how many euros does it take, how many dollars can how much can how many euros can $1 buy versus how many dollars can one krona buy, and that gives you the rate between the euros and krona. There's not enough market for them to exist independently, so they use dollars to go through. Arbitrage is it happens everywhere. You might have heard of it. Have you ever heard of somebody seeing a sale at Walmart, something on clearance at Walmart, and going, "Oh, I could sell this on eBay for more than it's costing here," because it's not sold everywhere. So somebody in California might be willing to pay more than the clearance price for that item. That's arbitrage. That means that you're taking from one pool and moving it to another pool for no reason other than it's worth more in the other pool. This might be you have a bond that's worth a certain amount of money in the US, but because of a financial crisis, people in Japan are buying American bonds a lot in their local bond market. So you take a US bond and move it to Japan and sell it for more than it's worth in the US, even though the bond underlying stayed the same. So transaction terminology: spot rate is a rate for an immediate trade. Forward rate, it's a exchange in the future. So today, it means that like you trade it today, but it's for trade in 5 months. So we can move forward. All right, purchasing power polarity. Okay, this is something that is oftentimes people confused. It costs more to live in America than it does in Poland. In Poland, the median family makes 11,000 US dollars a year. Whereas in America, the median family makes $70,000 a year. The difference in those two, yes, people in America can afford to buy more things and have a higher standard of living, but it's not 7 times higher because Poland, things are cheaper. You can buy bread cheaper in Poland than you can in America. So you need less money to buy bread. You can buy housing cheaper. All these products. Um, purchasing power polarity attempts to equate these two, to say this is the price there compared to here on equal dollars. Your relative purchasing, this one, it says, okay, well, there are other change. There's an exchange rate, there's a interest rate differences in the two countries. So take into account those and just see where are they about. So we can get through. This one, you have an interest rate differential between two countries. The US offers bonds at 5%, China offers them at 10%. So I want to buy those bonds today in China, but I know that there's a risk of the exchange rate changing. So I say, okay, I'll buy your bonds in China today, but you guarantee me the exchange rate that we have today in 6 months when they mature. We already talked about exchange rate risk. Short run exposure. This one is when you have you agree to buy a product from me tomorrow at a certain price, but there's a risk that the exchange rates will move before we actually complete the sale, hurting one of us. So one of the ways you can do that is you can say, okay, we'll agree to buy the product at this current exchange rate, and that would cover that exposure. Or you take the risk that maybe the exposure helps you. Again, if the euro loses value against the dollar and you have to buy something in euros, that helps you if you're coming from the dollar. So it might be you take that risk. Long runs, it's much more difficult because you're agreeing to buy something. Like, you're an airline and you agree to buy 747s from Boeing. Well, you don't just buy them one day. Those contracts are signed, and then it takes years to get delivery. You don't know what the exchange rate is going to be like in a year, much less 4 or 5 years. So that is a risk you're taking when you buy from another country over long term. With so much of the U.S. being such a dominant player in the economics and industry and all that, a lot of countries and companies actually do their accounting in U.S. dollars, even though they don't actually use U.S. dollars for their company. You can imagine this is something close to, it's better for them to say that they're a $1 billion company than to say that they're a $1 trillion yen company, because nobody knows. Most of the investors outside of their country don't know what a trillion yen is, but everybody knows what $1 billion is. When you are trying to manage your exchange rate risk, you could use a process of keeping some cash in both currencies. You keep some dollars and some euros because those are your two main ones you use. Then if it's cheaper to pay for things in euros, you pay for things in the euros you have. And if it's cheaper to pay for things in the US dollar, you pay for the US dollar. Trying to hedge individual currencies is very difficult. And it's can oftentimes actually end up costing you more money and increasing your risk. Political risk is what happens if you just invested in that country and they have a coup and the new dictator says all foreign debts are eliminated. We don't recognize any of them. We're a new country. Well, you sent them those 747s and they haven't paid yet. And now their state-run Airline says we don't have to pay you. The government says that this was canceled, so goodbye. Or what if they have a revolution and now they have a civil war and they're using your factory or your airplane or your whatever it is as either for their military purpose, or they're using it as a shield, or they're using it as a battleground. The political risk, when in times when everything is stable, people forget about the political risk, and then suddenly something happens like the Arab Spring, and countries all over a whole region suddenly are reneging on agreements they made, and things like I sent them a container truck full of equipment that they haven't paid for, but it got blown up because it ran over a mine. They're saying, well, we never received the product, so we're not paying you. Well, I'm out that product now. It is a very difficult thing because a lot of these political risks just happen immediately. You don't know about them in advance. They suddenly spring up. They're the breaking news tickers of the day. Does anybody have any questions about Chapter 18, the foreign international aspects of financial planning?
No.
All right. Any questions about anything else in the covered in the class before we have our final, which I will post on Friday, and you'll have until I believe it's May 6th to take it.
No.
Okay. Well, then I would like to thank all of you for being a great class. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. Remember, if you get your your project in early, I will grade it and return it to you. And don't forget, you have 1 week to make your designation if you want to use this class as a letter grade or as a pass fail. Thank you for being such a good class. I hope I've been a good instructor for you. And let me know if there's anything in the future I can do to be of assistance.
Thank you so much.